The crash of metal tearing through wood exploded across the Vermont dark like a rifle shot. Jake Calloway didn't even flinch. He just sat at his kitchen table, both hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee, staring at the foreclosure notice the bank had sent, the third one this month. His daughter was asleep upstairs. The storm was burying everything outside, and somebody had just driven a car straight into his fence. He grabbed his rifle before he grabbed his coat. What he found standing in the wreckage, soaking wet, bleeding and trembling, was the one woman on earth he had promised himself he would never help. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. And if you're new here, subscribe. Because what happens next will hit you somewhere deep. Jake Calloway had learned to stop expecting anything good to come through his front door. 3 years ago, he had a salary, a title, and a future. He had been Senior Operations Director at Weston Technologies, one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the Northeast. He had a wife. He had a plan. He had believed in the way that only a man who has worked his entire life for something can believe that the ground beneath him was solid. Then Claire Weston happened, and the ground opened up. Now he lived in a rented cabin on the edge of Montpelier, Vermont, heating oil running low child support payments, stretching every dollar until it screamed his 9-year-old daughter Lily sleeping upstairs under 2 quilts because he couldn't afford to run the furnace past 10 o'clock at night. He did odd jobs, plowing driveways, fixing generators, patching roofs for neighbors who felt sorry for him but were too polite to say so. He paid his bills 9 days late every month like clockwork. He told Lily they were camping indoors. She was starting not to believe him. He had been sitting at the kitchen table for almost an hour that night, not reading, not thinking, just existing in that particular kind of tired that goes all the way down to a man's foundation when the crash hit. It wasn't subtle. It was the sound of a vehicle doing serious, irreversible damage. Metal screaming, wood splintering. Then a single short, terrible silence. Then nothing. Jake was on his feet before his brain had processed the sound. His hand found the rifle on instinct, because this was Vermont in November, because it was past midnight, because no one who meant well drove their car into someone else's fence in the middle of a blizzard. He pulled on his work boots without lacing them, threw his coat over his shoulders, and stepped out into the storm. The wind hit him like a wall. Snow was coming sideways. He could barely see 10 feet in front of him. But the headlights were still on one of them anyway, casting a pale, crooked beam through the falling white. A black SUV top of the line had gone off the county road and taken out 8 feet of his cedar fence before stopping against the old oak tree at the edge of his property. He approached with the rifle low, not raised but ready. "Hey," he called out. "Hey, you okay in there?" No answer. He came around to the driver's side. The airbag had deployed. The window was cracked but intact. He pulled on the door. It was damaged, but it gave, and what he saw made him go very still. A woman, mid-40s. Dark hair soaked flat against her face. A cut along her left temple, not deep but bleeding steadily. The kind of cut that looks dramatic but isn't lethal. Her blouse silk, the kind of thing people wore to boardrooms. Not snowstorms, was soaked through and already going translucent at the shoulders. She was conscious, barely, her head resting back against the seat, eyes blinking slow and confused. On the back seat, folded and strapped in, was a wheelchair. Jake stared at it for one long second. Then he looked back at her face, and his stomach dropped through the floor of his chest. He knew that face. He had spent 18 months of his life thinking about that face. He had imagined what he would say to it. He had rehearsed speeches in the dark when Lily was asleep, and there was nothing to distract him from the anger. He had imagined once or twice, and he was not proud of this, telling that face exactly what it had cost him. Exactly what the signature on those papers had done to real people with real lives. Claire Weston, CEO of Weston Technologies, worth at last count somewhere north of $4 billion. The woman who had restructured his entire division out of existence, eliminated 412 jobs in a single quarter, and sent out a press release 3 hours later calling it a strategic pivot towards sustainable innovation. The woman who had signed his termination papers without, as far as anyone could tell, ever reading his name. "Sir." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Sir, I need help." Jake stood in the snow with the rifle hanging at his side and said absolutely nothing for what felt like a very long time. He thought about the day he'd cleared out his office. He thought about calling his wife from the parking garage because his hands were shaking too hard to drive. He thought about the conversation, he still called it the conversation like it had a title, when she told him she couldn't do this anymore. Couldn't do them anymore. Not like this. Not with everything falling apart. He thought about Lily 3 days later, asking why Daddy wasn't going to work anymore, and whether he had done something wrong. Had he done something wrong? "Sir, please." Claire's voice cracked on the second word. I can't move my legs. The accident, I can't feel them. I need you to help me." He almost said, "I know who you are." He almost said, "Get out of my property." He didn't say either of those things. Because here is the truth about Jake Calloway, the truth that his ex-wife Sandra had always called his greatest flaw, and his daughter Lily called his superpower. He could not watch a person suffer and do nothing. It was wired into him at a level deeper than anger, deeper than memory, deeper than everything Claire Weston had taken from him. He leaned the rifle against the doorframe. "Can you put your arms around my neck?" he asked. She looked up at him, and something moved behind her eyes, recognition maybe, or just raw fear. "Yes," she whispered. "I think so." It took him 4 minutes to get her out of the car, get the wheelchair out from the back seat, and get her into it. She didn't say a word the whole time except once when he lifted her, and her coat sleeve caught on the door handle, yanking her arm back hard. She made a sound, small, involuntary. The sound of someone who was holding themselves together with everything they had, and just ran out of a little bit of it. "Sorry," Jake said. It came out flat. He meant it anyway. He wheeled her through the snow, which was not easy, up the ramp he'd built 2 years ago for his father when the old man's knees had given out. He got the door open. He got her inside. He stood in the doorway, snow melting off his shoulders, and looked at Claire Weston sitting in a wheelchair in his kitchen in the middle of the night. "I'm going to make some calls," he said. "Roads are closed. Sheriff's department has been rerouting everyone since 9. It might be a few hours before anyone can get out here." "Okay," she said. Her teeth were starting to chatter. "Are you hurt anywhere besides your head?" She touched the cut at her temple without looking. "I don't think so. My back has been... I had a spinal injury. 6 months ago. The accident tonight, I lost control on the ice. I was trying to get to Burlington." "Burlington is 3 hours from here on a clear night." "I know." A pause. "I know that." He got her a towel from the bathroom. He set the kettle on. He did not offer to help her with her coat, because it was Claire Weston, and because some instinct in him, the remnant of something that might have been pride, told him that she had not asked for help with her coat. She struggled with it for almost 2 minutes. He watched her from across the kitchen, arms crossed, leaning against the counter. She got the buttons undone eventually, one by one, her fingers clumsy with cold. When she finally got it off her shoulders, she folded it carefully and set it in her lap and looked up at him with an expression he had never seen on her face in the 3 years he had worked for her company. Humiliation. Real quiet, total humiliation. "Thank you," she said, "for not..." She stopped. "For not what?" "For not making me ask." He turned and poured the hot water. They sat in silence for a while. The storm hammered at the windows. The old cabin creaked and held. Lily slept upstairs, oblivious to all of it, curled under her quilts, with her stuffed rabbit named Senator that she'd had since she was 4. Jake set a mug of tea on the kitchen table within Claire's reach, and sat down across from her with his own coffee, and neither of them said anything for a long moment. Then Claire looked around the kitchen. Not the way people look around when they're admiring something, but the way they look around when they're taking in the truth of a place. The mismatched chairs, the stack of mail on the counter, the child's drawing held to the refrigerator, with a magnet shaped like a lobster the furnace that was clearly not running the cold that sat in the corners of the room. "You have a child," she said. "Daughter, 9. Another silence. "How long have you been here?" she asked. "Cabin, about 18 months. He wrapped both hands around his mug. "Before that, I was in a 2-bedroom in Burlington. Before that, I had a house in Shelburne." He looked at her steadily. "Big yard, good schools, close to work." She heard it. He could see that she heard it. "Jake," she said. He went very still. She knew his name. Something cold moved through him, not the storm cold, something older and stranger. "You know who I am," he said. "I knew when I saw you in the headlights." Her voice was quiet and completely even. "I recognized you from your file. I reviewed personnel files after the restructuring, 6 months later when the lawsuits started." "There were 14 lawsuits," Jake said. "I know. I wasn't one of them." He set his mug down. "I thought about it. My lawyer told me I had a case. I didn't want Lily to spend 2 years watching her father fight a corporation in court." He paused. "I figured I'd just rebuild." "And did you—" The question sat between them like something with weight. "I'm working on it," he said. Claire wrapped both hands around her mug, and he noticed that her grip was not quite steady, whether from cold or from the accident, or from something else entirely, he couldn't tell. She was looking down at the table, not at him, and there was something in her posture that he recognized from his own worst nights, the particular architecture of a person who is holding something very heavy and has been holding it alone for a very long time. "I signed 400 documents the week of the restructuring," she said. 14-hour days. Back-to-back board calls. Legal was telling me we needed to move within the quarter, or we'd lose the Hargrove contract. My CFO had a presentation. The charts all pointed one direction. She looked up. "I did not read the names. I didn't read what the documents actually said. I signed them." "I know," Jake said. "I want you to understand that I'm not telling you that as an excuse." "Good. Because it isn't one." She didn't flinch. "No, it isn't." Somewhere upstairs, Lily shifted in her sleep and said something. Not words, just sounds, the comfortable murmur of a child deep in a dream. They both went quiet, listening until it faded back into silence. "She sounds happy," Claire said softly. "She is." Jake's voice was careful. "She doesn't know enough to be unhappy yet. She thinks this is an adventure." He picked up his mug. "I'm trying to let her keep thinking that for as long as I can." Claire was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My doctor told me last week that I will likely walk again. With surgery. With physical therapy. 6 months to a year of real work." She looked down at her hands. 3 months ago, the same doctor told me I probably wouldn't. So things are changing." "Is that why you were driving to Burlington in a blizzard at midnight?" She almost smiled. "There's a specialist at the medical center. I had a 4 a.m. appointment. I thought I could make it." A pause. "My driver quit last week. I haven't replaced him yet." "You drove yourself?" "I've been driving myself since the injury. Modified vehicle, hand controls." She looked up. "I refuse to stop doing things myself. It's—" She stopped, started again. "It's the one thing I have left that still feels like me." Jake looked at her for a long moment. This was not the woman he had imagined. The woman he had imagined in his dark, sleepless 3 a.m. rehearsals had been made of marble, smooth, impenetrable, indifferent. This woman in his kitchen had a cut on her temple and wet hair and cold hands, and she was fighting very hard and very quietly to hold herself together in front of a man who had every reason to throw her back out into the storm. That didn't make him feel better exactly, but it made him feel something other than what he had been feeling for 3 years. "The sheriff's department is still running the dispatch line," he said, standing. "I'm going to try them again. You should probably have someone look at that cut." "Jake." He stopped. "Why didn't you leave me in the car?" He stood with his back to her for a moment. The storm pressed at the windows. The furnace ticked. Lily was breathing quietly somewhere above them, safe and warm under two quilts. "Because I'm not you," he said. He walked to the window and picked up the phone. The night was long. The storm had no intention of stopping. And neither, as it turned out, did the truth which had been waiting 3 years for exactly this kind of darkness to finally get in. Where are you watching from? Drop your city below. I want to see how far this story has reached. New here. Hit subscribe. Part 2 is going to hit different. The sheriff's dispatcher picked up on the fourth ring, and Jake could hear it in her voice before she even spoke that particular brand of exhausted that meant the night had already been very long and was not planning to get shorter. "Dispatch, this is Officer Reyes. This is Jake Calloway, out on Route 12, the old Birchwood property. I've got a woman here, possible head injury, came off the county road about 20 minutes ago. Black SUV took out part of my fence near the oak on the north side. She says she can't feel her legs, but she had a pre-existing spinal condition, so I'm not sure how much of that is the accident and how much is—" "Mr. Calloway." Reyes cut in, not unkindly. "Route 12 northbound is completely closed. We've got a jackknifed semi near mile marker 7 and 2 more incidents south of you. I've got 4 units out, and none of them are moving faster than 15 miles an hour right now. Earliest I can get someone to you is 3 hours, maybe 4. 4 hours. I'm sorry, is she breathing all right? Is the bleeding controlled?" Jake looked over his shoulder at Claire, who was sitting with the dish towel he'd given her pressed to her temple, watching him with dark, quiet eyes. "Yeah, she's stable. Head wound is minor. Keep her warm, keep her calm, keep her awake if you can manage it. Call back if anything changes. And Mr. Calloway, I mean it, call back immediately if she loses consciousness or starts vomiting." "Understood." He hung up. 4 hours, Claire said. It wasn't a question. Give or take. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat back down. "You're not going anywhere tonight." She absorbed this without visible reaction, which he found somehow more unsettling than if she had argued. The old Claire Weston, the one he had watched give quarterly earnings presentations on a live stream from the company's glass tower in Boston. The one whose name appeared in Forbes 4 years running, that woman would have had 3 solutions and a backup plan before he finished the sentence. This one just pressed the towel to her head and nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "Are you in pain?" "My back always hurts." A slight lift of one shoulder. "I've gotten used to calibrating it. Tonight it's about a 6. She paused. "I've had worse. Since the injury." "Since the injury." He got up again, because sitting still in front of her felt wrong, like something he hadn't figured out the rules for yet. He went to the cabinet above the stove and found the bottle of ibuprofen he kept up there, away from Lily, shook 2 out, and set them on the table with a glass of water. Claire looked at them for a moment, then looked up at him. "Thank you." "Don't read into it," he said, and the words came out sharper than he intended. She didn't flinch. She picked up the pills, took them, set the glass down carefully. "I'm not," she said. "I know what this is." "What is it?" "You're a decent man in a situation you didn't choose." Her voice was level, almost clinical. "You're not going to let someone die on your property because of personal history. That's not a character flaw, Jake. That's just who you are." A short pause. "I knew that about you, actually. It was in your file." Something tightened in his chest. "You read my file." "I told you. After the restructuring." She set the dish towel down on the table, touched her temple gently with 2 fingers, decided the bleeding had slowed. "I read the files of every senior director we let go. 6 weeks after the fact, when the lawyer started calling." She folded her hands in her lap with a precision that looked like it cost her something. "By then, it was too late to matter. But I read them." "And what did my file say?" "That you had worked for the company for 11 years. That your performance reviews were consistently in the top 10%. That you had turned down 2 offers from competitors in 2019 and 2021 because you believed in the direction the company was going." She met his eyes. "That you had a daughter. That your wife had left the previous year. That you had just signed a 2-year lease on a house in Shelburne. The furnace clicked. The wind pushed hard at the north wall. Jake looked at the table, at the grain of the old wood, at the ring his coffee mug had left on the surface. "Then you know," he said. "Yes. You knew 6 weeks later exactly what signing those papers without reading them had done." "Yes." "And what did you do with that information?" The silence stretched. Claire looked at her folded hands. For a moment, she looked very tired, not just the kind of tired that came from a car accident on a winter road, but the kind that accumulated, the kind that settled into a person over months and years and didn't lift in the morning anymore. "I forwarded the files to HR," she said. "I asked them to flag any cases where severance had been miscalculated." She paused. 3 people received amended payments. I was told the rest had been handled correctly under the terms of their contracts. Another pause longer. I accepted that answer. I shouldn't have. I moved on to the next crisis, because there was always a next crisis. She looked up. "That is the most honest thing I have said out loud about this situation, and I need you to know that I know it is not enough." Jake looked at her for a long time without speaking. He had imagined this conversation 100 times. In the car on the way to a plowing job. In the shower. In those first terrible weeks when Lily was with Sandra and the apartment in Burlington was so quiet it had a sound of its own. He had imagined saying things that would finally make someone at Weston Technologies understand what it felt like to have 11 years of your life deleted in a memo. He had imagined being calm. He had imagined losing his composure entirely. He had imagined occasionally just walking away mid-sentence, because the thing about building a speech in your head for months is that you eventually realize the other person may not be worth delivering it to. He had not imagined this. He had not imagined her sitting in his kitchen at 1 in the morning telling him the truth without being asked. "My daughter asked me once," he said slowly, like he was deciding whether to say it as he said it, "why I didn't go to work anymore. She was 6. I told her that sometimes companies make decisions that change people's plans, and that it wasn't anyone's fault, it was just business." He picked up his mug. She accepted that. 6-year-olds accept most things if you say them with enough confidence. He set the mug back down. "I've been trying to believe it myself ever since." "Jake, I'm not finished." His voice was quiet, controlled. He had spent 3 years getting good at controlled. "The month after I lost the job, my wife told me she was leaving. That was its own thing that was already broken. I want to be honest about that. I'm not laying that at your door. But the timing." He pressed his lips together for a moment. "The timing was its own kind of damage. And then I sat in an empty apartment for 4 months sending out resumes to companies that didn't call back, and I started to understand what it means to be invisible." He looked at her directly. "I had been operations director. I had managed a team of 60 people, and I could not get a callback from a mid-level logistics firm in Burlington." "Because of the restructuring narrative," Claire said quietly. "The industry coverage, the way it was framed in the press." She said it without defensiveness, just stated it the way you state a diagnosis. Companies saw the headlines about Weston cutting its entire operations division, and they assumed structural failure. They assumed the division was being cut because it wasn't performing. "I know why it happened." He leaned back in his chair. "I figured it out eventually. I just needed someone at Weston Technologies to say it out loud." Claire looked at him steadily. "Your division was the highest performing division in the company. The decision to eliminate it had nothing to do with performance. The Hargrove acquisition required consolidating infrastructure and operations, was the most expensive line item that could be absorbed without affecting the product teams. It was a math decision." Her jaw tightened slightly. "A bad math decision, as it turned out. We lost 4 major contracts in the following year because the people who understood how to actually run the logistics infrastructure were gone." "I know that too," Jake said. "I watched it from a distance. The board eventually acknowledged it, privately." She looked down. There was never a public correction. I was advised against it. Of course you were. The kettle had gone cold. He got up and turned the burner back on, not because he wanted more tea, but because he needed to do something with his hands. He stood at the stove with his back to her and listened to the quiet tick of the gas heating the water. "Why were you driving to Burlington alone?" he asked without turning around. "Midnight storm coming in, spinal injury, no driver. That is not a rational decision for someone in your position." He heard her exhale. "No." "So, I had an argument with my assistant. She wanted to reschedule the appointment. I told her to make her own decisions about what she was doing tomorrow, and walked out." A dry, brief sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "I am working on that. The walking out part. My therapist calls it conflict avoidance in reverse." Conflict avoidance in reverse. When confronting the conflict feels too vulnerable, so instead you generate a different kind of conflict, one you can control, and then remove yourself from the situation before anyone can respond. She said it clinically precisely the way she probably said most things. It's a very efficient way to be alone. Jake turned around and looked at her. She was sitting very straight in the wheelchair. Chin-level hands still folded in her lap, and she was looking at the middle distance with an expression he could only describe as the look of someone who had just heard themselves say something true for the first time and wasn't entirely sure what to do about it. "You're in therapy," he said. "Since the injury." "Yes." A short pause. "It was not optional. My doctor insisted. I told him I didn't need it." Another pause. "I was wrong about that." "What happened?" he asked. "To your back." She was quiet for a moment, long enough that he thought she wasn't going to answer. "I collapsed at a board meeting," she said finally. "April of last year. I had been having symptoms for about 8 months before that, pain, numbness in my feet, some weakness, and I had been telling myself it was stress, overwork. I had been telling my body to manage itself while I managed the company." Her voice stayed flat, factual, the voice she probably used in earnings calls. "I collapsed mid-sentence during a presentation to the board, and when I woke up in the hospital, the neurosurgeon told me I had a degenerative spinal condition that had been progressing for probably 2 years, and that I had spent those 2 years making it significantly worse by refusing to slow down." She paused. "He said if I had come in 6 months earlier before the structural damage had progressed, the outcome would have been considerably better. But you didn't come in." "I didn't come in." Jake came back to the table and sat down. The kettle was starting to murmur behind him. "There's a word for that," he said. "Where you treat your own body the way you treated your employees. Where you decide it'll manage itself and you move on to the next thing." Claire looked at him. Something shifted in her expression, not hurt exactly, but something adjacent to it. "Yes," she said. "There is. I'm not saying it to be cruel." "I know." She held his gaze. "I know you're not." A pause. "I have thought about the parallel. My therapist was less subtle about naming it than you just were." A very small, very wry expression crossed her face. "She's good at her job." The kettle began to whistle. Jake got up and poured the water. He made her another cup of tea without asking, and this time when he set it in front of her, she didn't say thank you. And he didn't say, don't read into it. And somehow, that was its own kind of shift. They sat in silence for a minute. Not the silence from earlier, not the loaded, pressurized silence of two people who have too much to say and no idea how to start. This was something else, something that had a little more room in it. "Lily drew that," Jake said, nodding toward the refrigerator. The drawing held up by the lobster magnet. 2 figures, one tall, one small, standing in front of a structure that might have been the cabin or might have been a castle with Lily. It was sometimes hard to tell. Both figures had enormous smiles. The tall one had a dog which they did not own, and Lily was still campaigning for. Claire looked at it for a long moment. "How old did you say she was?" 9 in February. "She draws the dog bigger than the house." She thinks if she keeps drawing it, it'll eventually manifest. He almost smiled. I've been explaining that's not how reality works. She's been explaining that I'm wrong. She sounds like someone I'd hire, Claire said. She'd probably restructure you out of a job inside a month. It came out before he could stop it. The moment it landed, he felt the air in the room tighten, not in a cruel way, but in the way of something that was too true to be entirely comfortable. He watched something move through Claire's expression, a flinch that she controlled almost instantly, but not quite fast enough. Fair, she said quietly. I didn't mean, you did, she said. A little, and that's all right. She wrapped her hands around the mug. I think I'd rather you said the true things than the polite ones. I have people paid to tell me the polite ones. Jake looked at her for a moment. Does that work? Having people paid to be polite? It works beautifully for running a company, she said. It works terribly for everything else. Outside, the wind shifted direction, and the sound it made against the north wall changed lower, more sustained, like the storm had settled in and decided to stay a while. Jake knew the sound. He had spent enough winters in this cabin to know that this kind of storm didn't hurry. He heard Lily move upstairs, not awake, just turning over the way she did when she was deep in something good, chasing it through her sleep. He listened until the sound settled, then looked back at Claire, who was also listening, her head slightly tilted. She sleeps like that, Claire said. Through all of this, she can sleep through a freight train. He said it with a kind of helpless pride. When she was a baby, I used to check on her every 20 minutes because I couldn't believe anyone could sleep that hard and still be alive. Claire's expression softened in a way that was different from anything he'd seen from her tonight. Not the careful, controlled softness of someone managing a difficult conversation. Something less managed than that. Something that looked briefly like grief. I don't have children, she said. Not as an explanation, just as a fact she was setting on the table. I know. He paused. It was in your profile, the Forbes one. Something flickered at the corner of her mouth. You read that? I did. When you first came to Weston, I wanted to know who we were working for. He looked at the table. The profile called you relentlessly focused. The writer meant it as a compliment. I took it as one, Claire said. At the time. She turned the mug slowly in her hands. What would you call it now? Jake thought about it. He was not a man who gave careless answers, and she seemed to know that because she waited without pushing. Relentlessly focused on the wrong things, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Yes, she said. That's the one. The storm kept moving. The cabin kept holding. The drawing on the refrigerator, two figures, enormous smiles, a dog bigger than the house, caught the kitchen light in a way that made it seem almost to glow. And Jake Calloway, who had learned a long time ago that the night always felt longest in the hours just before it started to change, sat across from the woman who had taken everything from him, and understood for the first time that he was sitting across from someone who had also lost things, different things, things she had not even fully named yet, and that the storm outside was making no distinction between them. That didn't forgive anything, but it was something. And the night, as it turned out, was not done with either of them yet. It was close to 3 in the morning when Lily came downstairs. Jake heard her before he saw her, the familiar creak of the 4th step, the one he kept meaning to fix, the shuffle of socked feet on the hardwood. He turned in his chair, and she was already there in the kitchen doorway, blinking, her dark hair pulled sideways from sleep, Senator, the rabbit hanging from one hand by a single ear. She looked at her father. Then she looked at the woman in the wheelchair. Then she looked back at her father with the particular expression of a 9-year-old who has stumbled into something that adults are clearly in the middle of and is deciding in real time whether to be alarmed or just curious. Curiosity won. It usually did with Lily. Dad, she said. There's a car in the fence. I know. I'll fix it in the morning. Is she? Why? Lily pointed at Claire with the hand holding Senator, which meant Senator was also pointing at Claire. Lily. Jake's voice was gentle but firm. Don't point. Lily lowered her arm, unrepentant. She shifted her attention fully to Claire with the unguarded directness that children deployed before they learned it made adults uncomfortable. What happened to your head? Claire, who had been perfectly composed for the last 2 hours of one of the harder conversations of her adult life, looked at this 9-year-old girl pointing a stuffed rabbit at her, and something in her face went quiet and soft, in a way that Jake had not yet seen from her tonight. I had a car accident, Claire said. Just outside. Your dad helped me. Lily took this in with a small nod, the nod of someone updating a spreadsheet. Then she looked at the wheelchair, then back at Claire. Does it hurt? The chair? Lily. It's all right. Claire held up one hand toward Jake. She looked at Lily directly the way you look at someone when you've decided to take them seriously. The chair doesn't hurt. My back hurts sometimes. The chair actually helps. Lily considered this for a moment. My friend Danny's grandpa has one of those. He can do wheelies. I haven't learned wheelies yet, Claire said. But it's on the list. Lily almost smiled. She was still deciding about Claire doing the slow, thorough assessment that children did when they weren't sure whether a new adult was safe. She looked at her father again. Is she staying? Until the roads open? Yeah. Okay. Lily turned and padded back toward the stairs, Senator swinging. Then she stopped without turning around. There's an extra blanket in the closet by the bathroom. The green one. It's the warmest one. A pause. You should give her that one, Dad. Then she was gone back up the stairs, the fourth step creaking under her weight, and then silence. Jake stared at the doorway for a moment. She's extraordinary, Claire said quietly. She gets it from her mother. He stood up. I'll get the blanket. He came back with the green one. It was the warmest one. Lily was right. It was the one he'd had since his own father pressed it into his hands when he was 23 and heading north for the first time. And he draped it over Claire's shoulders without asking, without making it a thing. And she pulled it around herself and didn't say thank you. And he didn't say anything either, and that was fine. He sat back down. She didn't ask why I'm in the wheelchair, Claire said. Lily doesn't ask why. She asks what and how. He picked up his mug. She says why is the least useful question because it doesn't change anything. She's been saying that since she was 7. I have no idea where she got it. She got it from living with you, Claire said. He looked at her. You're the same, she said. You haven't asked me why once tonight. You've asked me what happened and what did you do and what are you going to do. Not once why. Jake turned the mug in his hands. Because you already know why. You were ambitious and you were moving fast and the machine was built to reward that. Why doesn't need explaining. It's the most human thing about the whole story. He set the mug down. What you did with it. That's the part that matters. Claire was quiet for a long moment. The green blanket was around her shoulders and she looked. Jake thought less like a CEO and more like a person. He wasn't sure when that had shifted. Sometime in the last hour. Sometime between the ibuprofen and the thing about Lily drawing the dog bigger than the house. Can I ask you something? She said. You can ask. What was the hardest part? She held his gaze. Not the job, not the money. What was the single hardest part of what came after? He didn't answer immediately. He sat with the question the way he sat with most things that deserved sitting with. The calls, he said finally. The calls. The calls I got from people on my team, in the weeks after. He put both hands flat on the table. I had 60 people in my division. 60. I knew most of their names, knew most of their situations. Dennis Farrell, Senior Logistics Coordinator, 17 years with the company. 2 kids in college. Wife just went back to work after being home with the kids for 10 years. He called me the day after the termination notices went out because he thought maybe I could explain what had happened. He thought because I was senior director, I must have known something, must have had some warning, must be able to tell him what he should do next. Jake stopped, cleared his throat. I didn't know anything. I was terminated the same day he was. I had nothing to tell him. Claire didn't look away. He called me 3 more times over the next 2 months, Jake said. The last call I missed it. I was at a job interview. He left a voicemail. He said he was doing okay. He said his wife's job was going to cover them for a while. He said he wanted me to know he didn't blame me. Jake looked at the table. I couldn't call him back for 4 days because every time I tried, I just couldn't get through it. Jake, Claire said, I'm not finished. He looked up. His voice was still controlled. He had spent 3 years getting good at this, at saying the hard things in the controlled voice, because if he ever let the control slip, he was afraid of what was underneath it. Marcus Webb, 26 years old. He had been with the company for 18 months. We hired him right out of college. He was brilliant. I mean, actually brilliant, the kind of person you see in their first year, and you already know what they're going to be in 10 years. He was supposed to transfer to the Boston product team the following quarter. The restructuring canceled the transfer. He paused. He was on a work visa. The termination triggered a 90-day clock on his immigration status. He had a fiancée. He had an apartment. He had a career that was about to start. A beat. He had to go home. Where was home? South Korea. Jake's jaw was tight. He went home. His fiancée is still here. They did long distance for 1.5 years trying to navigate the visa situation. I don't know what happened after that. I lost contact. He looked at her directly. I think about him. I think about Dennis. I think about the 60 of them individually, not as a number, not as a division, not as a line item on a restructuring plan individually. Because I knew them individually and they called me individually, and every single call was a person asking me why their life had just been dismantled, and me having nothing to give them. Claire had gone very still. Not the careful stillness of someone managing their expression. The stillness of someone who had stopped managing and was just taking it in, all of it, letting it land exactly as heavy as it was. 412, she said. That's the number from the press release, Jake said. The real number is higher. Contractors, part-time staff people adjacent to the division who lost their hours when the contracts disappeared. And the ripple of it. Marcus's fiancée. Dennis's kids who maybe don't finish college the way they planned. Spouses who go back to work before they were ready. Mortgages that get quietly renegotiated. He leaned forward slightly. The press release said 412. The actual human count is in the thousands. And it never shows up in any document because it's not the kind of thing that goes in a document. It just lives in people's lives. Claire picked up her mug and set it down again without drinking from it. Her hands were not quite steady. I want to tell you something, she said, and I need you to hear it as what it is, not as a defense. All right? I have never heard it said that way. Her voice was very quiet. I have received reports. I have sat through legal briefings. I have read the litigation summaries and the HR analyses and the consultant findings. And not one of those documents, not one contained a single name. Not Dennis Farrell, not Marcus Webb. She pressed her lips together. They contained categories: affected employees, impacted personnel, displaced workers, 412 units of a problem that had already been legally resolved. She looked up. No one put names on it, and I did not think to ask for names. No, Jake said. You didn't. I am telling you that I understand now that not thinking to ask for names was its own choice. A choice I made by default, but a choice. Her voice stayed even, but there was something underneath it that was working hard the way a current works under still water. I did not want the names. I understood that without understanding it, because names would have made it impossible to do what the board was asking me to do, and I was not ready to make it impossible. I chose the company over the names. Yes. and I have to live with that." "Yes," Jake said again. "You do." The word landed in the kitchen and sat there. Not cruel, not triumphant, just true. Claire exhaled slowly. She straightened in the wheelchair, squared her shoulders, and there was something almost painful about watching it, the way she pulled herself upright, even now, even in the middle of this, the way her body had learned to perform dignity, regardless of what was happening behind it. "After my collapse," she said, "when I was in the hospital and the doctors were explaining to me what the next year was going to look like, I had a moment about 48 hours in where I finally understood what I had been doing to myself. The same pattern. Ignore the signals. Override the warnings. Prioritize the outcome over the system producing it." She paused. "My neurosurgeon said something I've thought about every day since. He said the body doesn't negotiate. It sends you memos and you ignore them, and eventually it stops sending memos and starts sending consequences." Jake looked at her. "I thought of you," she said. "I thought of the restructuring. I thought of the memos I ignored there too." She held his gaze. "I know that's not absolution. I'm not offering it as absolution. What are you offering it as? An explanation of the mechanism." She straightened the blanket around her shoulders. "How someone who is not a cruel person can do cruel things. The answer is not malice. The answer is velocity. You move fast enough and you stop hearing things. You stop seeing things. And then one day, the thing you stopped seeing is yourself, and the thing you stopped hearing is the sound of 412 lives, and you are sitting in a stranger's kitchen at 3 in the morning trying to explain to the man whose life you derailed how it was possible that you did not know his name." She stopped. Outside something shifted in the storm, a brief pause like it was catching its breath, and in that pause, the cabin felt very close and very quiet, just the two of them, and the low light of the kitchen, and the green blanket, and the drawing on the refrigerator. "Dennis Farrell," Claire said. It came out careful, deliberate, like she was writing it down somewhere permanent. "And Marcus Webb." Jake looked at her. Something moved in his chest. Not warmth, not forgiveness, not anything that simple. Just a shift. The way weight redistributes when you've been carrying it a long time and someone finally acknowledges that it's there. "There were others," he said. "Tell me." He looked at her for a moment. Then he started talking. He talked about Patricia Huang, operations analyst, single mother of 3, who had used her Weston benefits to cover her youngest daughter's occupational therapy, and had lost that coverage with 60 days' notice and no transition plan. He talked about Roy Okafor, who had been 6 months from vesting in his retirement plan when the termination went through, and who had spent 2 years trying to recover through arbitration and eventually settled for 30 cents on the dollar because he couldn't afford to keep fighting. He talked about Jen Calder, who had transferred her entire family from Portland to Burlington for the job 18 months before the restructuring, who had bought a house, enrolled her kids in school, built a whole life around a position that evaporated before the moving boxes were fully unpacked. He didn't raise his voice. He said each name the way you say names that matter, carefully with space around them. And Claire listened without interrupting, without qualifying, without reaching for her lawyer's instinct to contextualize or her executive's instinct to problem solve. She just listened, and he watched her absorb each name the way she might absorb something that was genuinely landing for the first time, something that no report or legal summary had managed to do. When he finished, the kitchen was very quiet. "I can't fix most of this," Claire said. "No." "Roy Okafor's retirement. I might be able to—" "Don't." His voice stopped her. "Not right now. Don't go straight to fixing." He looked at her steadily. "Just stay in it for a minute. That's the thing people with power don't ever do. They hear about damage, and they immediately pivot to remedy, because sitting in the damage is too uncomfortable. Stay in it." Claire closed her mouth. She looked at her hands in her lap. And she stayed in it. A full minute. Maybe more. Jake watched her, and what he saw in that minute was something he had not expected to see on Claire Weston's face. Not in any of the 100 versions of this conversation he had rehearsed. He saw someone actually reckon with something, not perform reckoning, not the practiced PR-managed expression of a CEO making a public apology. Real reckoning, the kind that didn't come with a press release. When she finally looked up, something had shifted in her eyes. "I don't know how to start making this right," she said. "I want to be honest about that. I don't know where to start, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you I have a plan because I don't." A pause. "But I know that what I've been doing, which is moving forward and not looking back, because looking back was too much weight to carry, I know that I can't keep doing that. Tonight made that impossible." "Good," Jake said. She looked at him sharply. "That's a good thing," he said. "Impossible is where change actually starts. Everything before impossible is just options." She absorbed that. Then something moved at the corner of her mouth, not quite a smile, not exactly, but the precursor to one. "How long have you been this direct?" "My whole life," he said. "It's why I was good at operations and terrible at politics." "Is that why they didn't fight harder to keep you?" "That's one theory." "What's the other?" "The other is that I knew too much about how the infrastructure actually worked, and people with that much specific knowledge are harder to manage than people with less." He said it evenly without bitterness. "I had stopped being an asset and started being a variable. Variables are harder to plan around." Claire looked at him with an expression that was entirely unguarded now. Not the CEO face, not the carefully composed face of someone getting through a hard night, not the face of a woman managing how she was perceived, just her face with all the complexity in it that a face could hold when someone stopped managing it. "You should have been promoted," she said. 3 years ago, before any of this. You should have been in the room where those decisions were being made." She said it flatly the way she delivered facts. "I looked at your trajectory in the file. You were on the list for VP of Operations. The position was eliminated in the same quarter as the restructuring." A pause. "You never knew about the list?" "No," Jake said. "I didn't know about the list." "I know." He looked at the table. For a moment, something tightened in his jaw, in his shoulders, the way it did when a thing that had already hurt you found a new angle to hurt you from. VP of Operations. He sat with that for a moment, not long, just long enough, and then let it go, the way you let go of things that you can't change and that will only damage you if you hold them. "That's the one that almost gets me," he said quietly. "I know it is, I'm sorry." He looked up. "I know sorry doesn't cover it," she said. "I know it's not a transaction. I know you can't hand someone a sorry and have it balance the account." She looked at him with the kind of steadiness that took real effort to maintain. "But I am sorry, Jake. I'm saying it because it's true, and because you deserve to hear it said by the person who should have said it a long time ago." Jake Calloway looked at Claire Weston across his kitchen table at 3 in the morning, the storm pressing at the walls, the green blanket around her shoulders. Lily sleeping upstairs, Senator the rabbit watching over her from the pillow. He thought about Dennis Farrell's last voicemail. He thought about Marcus Webb's 90-day clock. He thought about the foreclosure notices on the counter. And he thought about the fact that sorry did not cover it, and that it also was not nothing, and that the distance between those two things was where most of the hard work of being a person actually lived. "I hear you," he said. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't absolution. It wasn't the end of anything. But it was the first true thing he had said to her that wasn't built on anger and in the long, unresolved arithmetic of the night that counted for something. The storm pushed at the windows. The drawing on the refrigerator, 2 figures' enormous smiles, a dog bigger than the house held its place against the wall. And somewhere between the names of the people he had just spoken aloud and the silence that followed them, something in the room changed its shape. Neither of them rushed to fill it. It was Claire who broke the silence, and she did it the way she did most things, directly, without preamble, as if she had been turning the words over in her mind long enough and had decided they were ready. "I want to ask you something," she said. "And I want you to know, before I ask it, that the answer doesn't change anything about tonight. It doesn't change what I owe you or what I owe the others. I'm not asking it to negotiate." Jake looked at her. "Then ask it." "What would it have taken?" She held his gaze steadily. "Not to fix it after I understand that ship has sailed, but before. In the moment. What would it have taken for someone like me, moving at the speed I was moving, to actually stop?" He didn't answer right away. He leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment, the way a man looks when he's deciding whether to give the easy answer or the real one. "A name," he said finally. "One name on the document, not Senior Operations Director, Grade 7 Burlington office. A name." He looked back at her. "You signed 400 documents with names on them. Instead of titles and job codes, you don't sign them the same way. You can't. The human brain is not built to process a name without attaching something to it." Claire was quiet. "That's it," she said. "That's it. One policy change. Every termination document requires the full legal name of the affected employee in the signature field directly above the executive signature line. You want to sign it, you read the name first." He said it without heat, just the flat precision of someone who had thought it through and arrived at the answer a long time ago. "You wouldn't have signed 400. You might have signed 40 and pushed back on the rest. Or you would have signed all 400 and at least known what you were doing." He paused. "Either way is better than what happened." Claire absorbed that. Her jaw tightened slightly. Legal would have pushed back. Legal always pushes back. They would have called it a liability issue, creating a paper trail that links individual names to executive decisions. It's already a paper trail. The names are already in the system. Legal just prefers that executives don't have to see them. He looked at her. "Which is the entire problem." She opened her mouth and then closed it. He watched something move through her, the instinct to counter, to contextualize, to find the procedural argument, and then he watched her override it. She pressed her lips together and nodded a single deliberate nod. "You're right," she said. "I know. You don't have to say it like that. You told me earlier you wanted the true things, not the polite ones." Something flickered at the corner of her mouth. "I did say that." "I'm holding you to it." She looked at him for a moment, with an expression he was starting to recognize, the one that appeared when he'd said something she hadn't expected from him, something that required her to recalibrate. He had the sense that not many people held Claire Weston to things she said. He had the sense that had been part of the problem for a very long time. "The name policy," she said. "That's actionable. Don't." His voice was quiet but firm. She stopped. "Don't go into solution mode yet. You did that 2 minutes ago with Roy Okafor, and I stopped you and you went back into it anyway." He kept his voice even. "I'm not a consultant. I'm not a strategic advisor. I'm a man sitting in my kitchen at 4 in the morning. And what I need from you right now is not a plan. Plans are what you use to manage your way out of discomfort. What I need is for you to stay uncomfortable for a little longer." Claire looked at him, and the expression on her face was one that he suspected she had very rarely worn in any boardroom, any meeting, any interaction that she had controlled the terms of. It was the expression of someone who had just been told the truth about themselves by someone with no incentive to soften it, and who recognized somewhere deep and unhappy that the truth was accurate. "I do that," she said. "The solution mode. You do it the way some people use a drink. The moment the feeling gets hard, you replace it with a task." He looked at her steadily. "I'm not criticizing the mechanism. I understand the mechanism. I've used my own version of it." He glanced briefly toward the stairs. "For 3 years, every time I started to feel sorry for myself, I found something to fix. A fence, a generator, a roof, something I could put my hands on and make better." He looked back at her. "The problem is when fixing becomes a way of never sitting in the thing that needs to be sat in." Claire was very still. "My therapist," she said slowly, has said almost exactly that to me, on multiple occasions. She sounds like someone I'd hire, Jake said. It took Claire a moment. Then she laughed, short, startled, real, the first real laugh of the night, and the sound of it was so unexpected in the quiet kitchen that it almost startled him too. Not a polished laugh, not the kind of laugh a CEO deployed at a fundraising dinner. A laugh that came out before she could decide whether to allow it. "That's the second time you've used my line on me," she said. "You left it there." "I did." She settled back, and something in her posture had shifted, not softened exactly, but relieved of some of its performance. Like a person who had been holding a position for so long, they'd forgotten it was a position. "Can I tell you something that I haven't told anyone? Not my board, not my assistant, not my therapist." "You can tell me." "I don't want the company back." He looked at her. "My board is waiting for me to return," she said. "Full capacity. They've been patient patients. I'm aware is finite, and the expectation is that once the spinal surgery is done and the recovery is complete, I come back and resume. Pick up where I left off." She turned the mug in her hands. "And I have been telling everyone, including myself, that that's the plan. That I'm going to walk back in there literally. I intend to be walking when I do it and take back what's mine." She looked up. "But sitting here tonight saying these names, I keep thinking about what I would be walking back into. The velocity, the documents, the board calls, the relentless forward motion that doesn't let you stop long enough to read a name." She paused. "I don't know who I would be walking back in there as. I'm not the same person who left. I don't know if the job I'm walking back to is a job I should want." The kitchen was very quiet. "That's the most honest thing you've said all night," Jake said. "I know. It terrifies me." "Why?" "Because if I don't go back, I don't know who I am." She said it simply without drama, which made it land harder than drama would have. "The company is 15 years of my life. It's every decision I ever made about what to sacrifice and what to keep. It's the reason I didn't take vacations, and didn't have children, and didn't stay in any relationship long enough to find out if it could be real." She looked at him with something exposed in her face, something she clearly didn't show often. "If I walk away from it, I have to look at all of that and account for it. All of it. And that accounting is—" She stopped. "Terrifying," Jake said. "Yes." "Welcome," he said quietly, "to what the rest of us live with every day." She looked at him sharply, not with offense, with something closer to recognition. "People without the company, without the title, without the $4 billion to insulate them from consequence, they have to do that accounting in real time, every day." He kept his voice level, not cruel, just honest. "I did it in an empty apartment in Burlington with a 9-year-old every other weekend and a stack of rejection letters and nobody paying for my therapy." He paused. "The accounting doesn't go away because you defer it. It just collects interest." Claire looked at her hands for a long moment. "I know," she said. "I know that." She looked up. "Is that what this has been?" "For you 3 years of accounting. 3 years of starting to account," he said. "I'm not done." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm not sure it's the kind of thing that gets done. I think it just gets more honest over time." "Does it get easier?" "Parts of it." He glanced toward the refrigerator, the drawing, the 2 figures, and the dog, bigger than the house. "The part where you understand what actually matters gets easier. The part where you forgive yourself for what it cost to figure that out, that one takes longer." Claire followed his gaze to the drawing. She looked at it for a long time. "She drew you smiling," she said. "She always draws me smiling." He said it quietly. "Even in the months when I wasn't. She draws the version of me she believes in." A pause. "That's kept me honest. You can't let down a kid who draws you smiling when you're not." Claire turned back to him, and there was something in her eyes that was different from anything he'd seen in the last 4 hours. Not the careful, managed emotion of someone getting through a hard conversation. Not the executive composure, not even the genuine reckoning of the last hour. something older and quieter than any of that. "I owe you more than an apology," she said. "I want to be specific about that, and I want to say it clearly, and I want you to know it's not contingent on anything. I owe Dennis Farrell more than an apology. I owe Roy Okafor a real conversation, not an arbitration settlement. I owe Marcus Webb, and I am aware I may not be able to find him, or that he may not want to hear from me. But I owe him an acknowledgement that what happened to him was wrong, and that it happened because I wasn't paying attention to the right things." She paused. "I don't know what making that right looks like, but I am committing to finding out, not as a PR exercise, not because my lawyers tell me it's the better litigation strategy, because it's what the accounting requires." Jake looked at her for a long time without speaking. "There's something I have to say to you," he said finally. "Say it." "I don't trust you yet." She held his gaze. "I know." "I'm not saying I won't. I'm saying I don't. Tonight has been more than I expected it to be. But a hard conversation in a kitchen in a snowstorm is not the same as consistent action over time." He kept his voice steady. "I've watched corporations do accountability theater for 20 years. The statement of values, the diversity initiative, the restructuring that comes with a press release about moving forward together." He paused. "I need to see what you do when no one is watching, when it's inconvenient, when your legal team tells you it's inadvisable, and your board tells you it's unnecessary, and doing the right thing is going to cost you something real." "Yes," Claire said. "That's fair." "I'm not looking for fair. I'm looking for honest." "Then honest, I don't know yet if I'm capable of that consistently. I know I want to be. I know I understand now, in a way I didn't before, why it matters." She met his gaze. "I know that tonight changed something in me that I don't think is going to change back." A pause. "But you're right that wanting to be a different person and being a different person are two different things, and I have a track record that does not support automatic trust, and I think you'd be a fool to give it to me before I've earned it." "That's the most self-aware thing you've said all night." "I'm working on self-awareness. It's a newer skill." "How's it going?" "It's uncomfortable and occasionally humiliating, and my therapist says that means it's working." She almost smiled. "So, progress." He felt something shift in his chest, not dramatically, not the cinematic crack of a wall coming down, but the quieter thing that happened when you'd been braced against something for a long time, and the thing changed its nature. Not gone, just different. Not an enemy anymore, or not only that. Something more complicated and less clean, the way most true things were. The fourth step creaked. They both looked up. Lily was standing at the bottom of the stairs again, still carrying Senator. But this time, she was fully awake, wide-eyed, alert, the particular alertness of a child who has been lying upstairs listening to the tone of voices without being able to make out the words, and has decided that the tone requires investigation. "Dad?" She looked at him. "Are you okay?" "I'm okay, Bug." She looked at Claire, then back at her father. She was doing the assessment again, the slow, thorough kind, but this time she had more data to work with, and she was 9 years old and smarter than most of the adults Jake had worked with in his entire career. "You were talking for a long time," Lily said. "We were. About important stuff." "Yes." Lily considered this. Then she walked across the kitchen, not to her father, but to the counter, and opened the cabinet where Jake kept the good crackers, the ones she was technically only supposed to have with lunch. She pulled out the box, looked at her father with an expression that acknowledged she was breaking the rule, and was prepared to defend her position, and then walked to the table and set the box in the middle. "Important stuff needs snacks," she said. She looked at Claire. "Do you like peanut butter crackers?" Claire looked at this 9-year-old girl with the stuffed rabbit and the absolute confidence of someone who had decided the situation required crackers and was implementing the solution. "I love peanut butter crackers," Claire said. Lily nodded, satisfied. She pulled out the chair next to Claire and climbed into it and opened the box. "You can have the first one because you're a guest." "Lily," Jake said. "It's 4 in the morning." "I know." She handed a cracker to Claire with the gravity of someone completing an important task. "Important stuff." She looked at her father. "You too, Dad." Jake looked at his daughter sitting at the table at 4 in the morning, distributing peanut butter crackers to a CEO in a wheelchair, like it was the most natural thing in the world, and he felt something move through him that he didn't have a clean word for. Something that was made up of exhaustion and grief and pride and love in proportions he couldn't have measured, all of it hitting him at once in the way things did when you'd been holding yourself together for hours, and suddenly the person you loved most in the world just appeared and handed you a cracker. He took the cracker. Lily settled into her chair. For a few minutes, no one said anything. Just the three of them, the storm, the crackers, the kitchen light making everything warm and contained and slightly unreal. Then Lily looked at Claire with the kind of directness that children aimed at things they'd been thinking about for a while. "Are you going to be okay?" she asked. Claire looked at her. "Yes," she said. "I think I am." "Is your back going to get better?" "The doctors think so, with some work." Lily nodded slowly. "My dad's knee was really bad last winter. He didn't complain, but I could tell because of the face he made when he got up." She looked at Jake. The face. Lily. It was a concerning face. She looked back at Claire. He did the exercises the doctor gave him every morning, even when he didn't want to, and now it's better. She paused. "So, the exercises work if you do them." "That's good advice," Claire said. "It's just true," Lily said in the tone of someone who had not yet learned to understate herself. Jake looked at Claire, and Claire looked at Jake, and something passed between them over the top of Lily's head, not a smile exactly, not yet, but the acknowledgement of something that had no name, but that both of them understood. The particular absurdity and grace of being two people who had been circling something huge and painful for 4 hours and having a 9-year-old sit down and reduce it simply by being present to something human-sized. "She really is extraordinary," Claire said quietly. "She really is," Jake agreed. Lily, who was aware she was being talked about and who had decided to accept the compliment by pretending not to hear it, took another cracker and held it out to Senator. Then she looked up at both of them. "Are you friends now?" she asked. The question sat in the kitchen with the particular weight that only a child's honest question could carry. Jake looked at Claire. Claire looked at Jake. "We're working on it," Jake said. Lily considered that. "Working on it is good," she said. "That's what Dad says about the dog. We're working on it." She looked at Jake with an expression of absolute confidence. "And we're going to get the dog." Lily. "We're going to get the dog, Dad." Jake looked at the ceiling briefly. "Go back to bed." She climbed down from the chair, taking a cracker with her, and she paused at the foot of the stairs and looked back at them both. "Good night," she said to Claire. "Good night, Lily," Claire said. Lily looked at her for one more moment with the eyes of someone who was seeing a person clearly and had made a decision about them. "I hope your back gets better soon," she said, and then she went back up the stairs, the 4th step creaking beneath her, and was gone. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, something had changed in the storm. The press of it against the walls had shifted. The sound of it altered in a subtle way that Jake, who had spent enough winters listening to weather, recognized as the first intimation of change. Not over, not yet, but beginning. "She's going to be fine," Claire said. "Whatever else happens, that one is going to be fine." "I know." His voice was rough at the edges. "She keeps me honest." "She keeps you, period," Claire said. "I think she's the reason you didn't collapse in that apartment in Burlington." He didn't argue. It was true, and he had always known it was true, and it was different somehow to hear it said out loud by someone else in the middle of a night like this one. "I have a question for you," he said. And I want you to understand I'm not asking it to start anything. I'm asking because I've been sitting on it for 4 hours, and I think it's time. Ask it. He looked at her directly. What are you actually going to do? Not the name policy, not the calls to Roy and Marcus, not the general commitment to being different. I mean tomorrow. Next week. Concretely. What does accountability look like in your actual life when you get back to it? Claire held his gaze. And for the first time all night, she didn't answer immediately, didn't reach for the executive reflex, didn't produce a structured response. She sat with the question, actually sat with it, and he could see her turning it over, testing it against whatever was now present in her that hadn't been present at the start of the night. I don't know yet, she said. I know that sounds inadequate. It doesn't, he said. It sounds true. Which is better. I know that the company needs to change before I'll go back to it. I know that I'm not walking back into that building to run the same machine the same way. She paused. I know that there are people who were hurt, and that reaching out to them personally without lawyers present is the right thing, and that I'm going to do it regardless of what legal advises. She looked at her hands. And I know that whatever I build next, if I build anything, it will have names in it. Real names. In every document that touches a human life. He looked at her. That's a start, he said. It's a small start. All real starts are small. He picked up the cracker Lily had left on the table beside him. You know what the biggest lie in business is? That transformation happens in a moment. A pivot. A restructuring, a strategic realignment. He turned the cracker over in his fingers. Real change is slow and specific, and it happens in the particular. One name, one call, one conversation at 4 a.m. in a kitchen in Vermont. Claire looked at him for a long moment, with that expression, the unguarded one, the one that had appeared sometime between the names and the crackers, and couldn't seem to find its way back behind the composure it had come from. Why are you still talking to me? She asked. After everything. Why are you still at this table? Jake put the cracker down. Because Lily gave you the green blanket, he said. And my daughter has never once been wrong about a person. The storm shifted again outside, and the first pale intimation of something that might eventually become dawn began to feel, if not visible, at least possible, as if the dark had reached its own outer limit and was considering slowly the direction of retreat. Neither of them moved. Neither of them needed to. The first light came in the way Vermont light always came after a hard storm. Not dramatic, not sudden, but slow and gray and honest, like someone telling you a difficult truth gently, because they respected you enough not to soften it entirely. Jake noticed it first. The quality of the dark through the kitchen window had shifted, the black becoming something closer to charcoal, then to the color of old iron, and he knew from 3 winters in this cabin that they had crossed into morning without either of them marking the crossing. Claire had dozed off sometime around 5, not deeply. She was still upright in the wheelchair. Chin dipped slightly. The green blanket around her shoulders, but her breathing had steadied, and her hands had gone still in her lap, and he had decided not to wake her. He sat across from her with the last cold inch of his coffee, and he looked at her the way you could only look at a person when they were asleep and couldn't feel you doing it. She looked, he thought, like someone in the middle of becoming something, which was not a comfortable thing to be and not a comfortable thing to witness, but it was real, and real was what they had been dealing in all night. He was still sitting there when his phone vibrated on the table. He picked it up quickly so it wouldn't wake her. It was a text from the sheriff's dispatch. Roads on Route 12 were passable as of 6:15. A plow had gone through. They could send a deputy if needed, but conditions were improving. He set the phone down. He looked at Claire. He picked the phone back up and typed, "We're okay. No deputy needed. Thank you." He set it down again and looked out the window at the beginning of a day he had not planned for and could not have predicted, and he sat with the particular clarity that came from not having slept, which was its own kind of honesty. The mind stripped of the padding, it usually kept around the hard things, everything closer to the surface, and more accurately itself. He thought about what she had said about not wanting the company back. He thought about the name policy. He thought about Marcus Webb somewhere in Seoul, and whether he had ever married the woman he'd left behind, and whether there was any version of accountability that could reach across that kind of distance. He thought about Lily drawing him smiling when he wasn't. He thought about Roy Okafor and 30 cents on the dollar, and 2 years of fighting a corporation with whatever energy a man had left after working his whole life and having it taken. He was still thinking when Claire stirred. She came back to consciousness the way she did most things quickly, without the slow dislocation of someone who needed time to place themselves. Her eyes opened, and she was immediately present, immediately oriented, and she looked at him across the table with an expression that was for just a moment completely unguarded in the way faces were in the first second after sleep, before the day's architecture went back up. "You didn't wake me," she said. "You needed it." She straightened in the chair, adjusted the blanket, touched her temple, where the cut had dried to a dark line. "What time is it?" 6:30. She absorbed this. The roads. Passable. Route 12 was plowed an hour ago. She nodded slowly, and he watched her doing what he had watched her do all night, taking in information and processing it without visible turbulence. The executive function that was apparently so deeply embedded, it persisted through car accidents and sleepless nights, and the most honest conversation of her adult life. "I need to call my assistant," she said, "about the Burlington appointment. Use my phone if yours is dead." She reached into the pocket of her slacks. The silk blouse was dry now, wrinkled beyond recovery, but she wore it with the same posture she would have worn a tailored jacket, and found her phone. The screen was cracked from the accident. She looked at it for a moment, then set it on the table. "May I use yours?" He pushed the phone across. She dialed from memory, which did not surprise him. She held the phone to her ear, and when her assistant picked up on the second ring early, but the tone of Claire's voice suggested this was a person accustomed to early calls, she spoke in a voice that was different from the one she'd used all night. Clipped, precise, efficient. Not unkind, but compressed. The voice of someone switching registers. "Karen, I'm in Montpelier, Route 12. The car is in a ditch. I need you to contact the Burlington Medical Center and reschedule Dr. Harmon's appointment for next week, whatever he has available. I'm fine. Minor laceration, no hospital needed. I need a car out here when the roads are clear enough." A pause. "Yes, I know. I'll explain later." Another pause longer, and something shifted in Claire's voice, slightly, barely, but Jake caught it. "Karen, I'm sorry about yesterday. The way I left. That wasn't—" She stopped. "Yes, thank you. I'll see you this afternoon." She handed the phone back across the table. Jake said nothing. "I'm working on that too," she said. "The walking out." "I heard." She looked at her cracked phone screen for a moment, then put it back in her pocket. She looked at the box of peanut butter crackers still on the table, at the 2 mugs, at the drawing on the refrigerator. She looked at all of it like she was memorizing it, or like she was doing the thing she had probably not done enough of in her life, simply looking at a place and letting it be real to her without immediately determining what it was useful for. "I want to tell you what I'm going to do," she said. "Not a plan, not a strategic framework. What I'm actually going to do." "All right." "I'm going to contact Dennis Farrell. I have his information, it's still in the file. I'm going to call him myself, not through legal, not through HR, myself, and I'm going to ask him how he is, not as a prelude to anything, just how is he? How are the kids?" She paused. "I'm going to do that for every person whose name you said last night, and then I'm going to ask each of them if there's anything I can do. Not offer a settlement, not manage a liability. Ask." Jake watched her. "And I'm going to tell my board that I'm restructuring how the company handles workforce decisions going forward. Every document that results in a termination will carry the full legal name of the person it affects directly above the executive signature line." She said it exactly the way he had said it, using his words deliberately, and he understood that was intentional, that she was showing him she had heard it carried, it made it hers. That will be non-negotiable, and I'm going to personally champion it in front of the board, which means I'm going to lose the argument with legal, and I'm going to win it anyway. And if the board pushes back, then the board finds out I'm willing to make it a public commitment before an internal one, which tends to focus their attention. Her voice was steady. I've run this company for 15 years. I know exactly which lever to pull. That's the machine talking, Jake said. She looked at him. You just described using the same velocity that caused the problem to fix the problem, he said. Moving fast, applying pressure, winning the argument. That's the same mode. He kept his voice level. The question isn't whether you can force the change through. You probably can. The question is whether you understand why it matters slow enough and deep enough that it survives you, that it becomes the company's character and not just your mandate. Claire was quiet for a long moment. You would have been very good in that VP role, she said. I know. I'm serious. So am I. He looked at her. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying do it slower than feels natural and explain why at every step. Because the people who work for you have the same problem you had. They're moving fast and they're not reading the names. You don't fix that with a policy. You fix it by changing what the culture rewards. He paused. That takes years, not a board meeting. Claire looked at him for a long time. You should be in that room, she said. Not advising from the outside, in the room, where these decisions are being made. She said it slowly, like she was working it out as she spoke. The people around me right now are good at execution. They're good at the machine. Not one of them would have said what you've said to me tonight. She paused. Not one of them would have had the standing to say it, because not one of them has felt what this machine does to the people it runs through. Jake felt something shift in the room, something he recognized as a door opening, and was not sure yet whether he wanted to walk through. Don't, he said. I'm not offering you anything. It sounds like you're about to. I'm stating an observation, she said. What you do with it is your business. She held his gaze. But I want to say it clearly, the company needs the perspective you have. It needs someone who has lived on the receiving end of the decisions that get made in that room. Not as a token, not as a diversity metric, as an operational voice with real authority. She paused. That's all I'm saying. Jake stood up. He took the mugs to the counter and rinsed them, mostly because he needed to do something with his hands, because the thing she was gesturing toward was large enough that his body required motion to process it. He stood at the sink for a moment, looking at the window, at the gray-white of the morning outside, at the fence that needed fixing, at the tracks in the snow where the SUV had come off the road. He thought about the foreclosure notice on the counter. He thought about Lily and the dog she was going to get. He thought about Patricia Huang's daughter and the occupational therapy and the benefits that disappeared with 60 days' notice. He thought about what it meant to be in the room where the decisions were made. And he thought about what he had told Claire less than 2 hours ago, that integrity was not a guarantee against failure, but that it was the only foundation worth building on, and that everything else was just speed. He turned around. I'm not interested in a job at Weston Technologies, he said. I want that to be completely clear. Understood. I'm not interested in a redemption project where you bring back the man you fired to demonstrate that the company has changed. That's theater, and it would be theater, and I would know it was theater, and so would everyone else. I agree with you. But... He leaned against the counter. If there is ever a genuine operational role, not a public-facing position, not a spokesperson function, something real, something with actual decision-making authority in the part of the company that touches the most lives, and if that role is offered to me on the same terms, it would be offered to any other qualified candidate with the same compensation and the same standing and the same right to walk into any room in that building and speak freely. He paused. Then, I would consider it. Not accept it. Consider it. Claire looked at him steadily. That's more than I expected. Don't get ahead of yourself. I'm not. The corner of her mouth moved. I learned tonight that getting ahead of myself is a well-documented liability." Jake almost smiled. He didn't quite get there, but he almost did, and it was closer than he had been to it in longer than he wanted to calculate. He heard the fourth step creak. Lily came down the stairs in the particular manner of a child who had decided that this time she was fully committing to being awake, dressed, hair pushed back with the headband she wore when she meant business. Senator tucked under one arm. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked at both of them and assessed the situation in approximately 4 seconds. "You're still here," she said to Claire. "I am," Claire said. "The road's just opened." "So you're leaving?" "Soon, yes." Lily walked to the table and sat in the chair she'd occupied at 4 in the morning. She set Senator on the table facing Claire, which meant Senator was providing oversight, which was Lily's highest gesture of investment. "Are you coming back?" Lily asked. "Lily," Jake said. "It's a normal question, Dad." "It's a complicated question." "Questions are only complicated if the answer is complicated," Lily said with the absolute confidence of someone who had not yet discovered that this was not entirely true. She looked at Claire. "Are you?" Claire looked at this 9-year-old girl who had handed her a cracker at 4 in the morning and given her the green blanket and pointed Senator at her in full supervisory capacity, and she said something that Jake recognized in the moment she said it was the truest answer available. "I hope so," Claire said. "I'm going to try." Lily considered that. She nodded once satisfied. "Okay." She looked at her father. "Is there breakfast?" "There is going to be breakfast," Jake said. "Give me 10 minutes." Lily picked up Senator and went to her habitual chair at the corner of the table, pulled her knees up to her chest, and began talking to Senator in a low, confidential murmur about the storm and the car and the fence, and the fact that they were definitely going to need to get more peanut butter crackers. She was already half in another world, the way children moved between the serious and the ordinary without seams, and Jake watched her for a moment and felt the familiar thing. The thing he had no word for, that was made of love and exhaustion and gratitude and the perpetual low-grade terror of being responsible for something that mattered more than you knew how to measure. He started making eggs. Claire maneuvered her wheelchair to a position where she could see both Lily and the window, and she sat there while he cooked, and the kitchen filled with the sound of the pan and Lily's quiet one-sided conversation with Senator and the occasional gust of wind that was now noticeably weaker than it had been an hour ago. "Jake," Claire said. He turned. "I want to pay for the fence." He shook his head. "No. It was my car. I know whose car it was." He turned back to the eggs. "The fence needs replacing anyway. I've been putting it off." He paused. "Consider it a reason to finally do it." She was quiet for a moment. "That's not how accountability works." He looked at her over his shoulder. "No, but it's how I work. You can't buy your way into my good graces, and you know it." He turned back. "If you want to do something useful, do what you said you were going to do. Call Dennis Farrell. Find Marcus Webb. Talk to Roy Okafor, like a person, not a liability." He moved the eggs in the pan. "That's worth more than a fence." Claire sat with that. After a moment she said, "All right." "All right," he said. He made 3 plates. He set one in front of Claire and one at Lily's place, and one at his own. And then he sat down, and the 3 of them, a single father who had rebuilt a life out of the parts of himself he had left, after someone took the rest, a CEO, who had collapsed under the weight of the architecture she'd mistaken for herself, and a 9-year-old girl who drew the people she loved, smiling even when they weren't, ate breakfast together at a kitchen table in Vermont, while the storm finished doing whatever storms did when they were done. It was Lily who spoke first the way it usually was. "Senator thinks you should come back," she said to Claire. "He's a good judge of character." "I'll take Senator's endorsement seriously," Claire said. "You should." Lily ate a bite of egg. "He didn't like Mr. Ferris from the hardware store, and Dad said he was perfectly nice, but then Mr. Ferris cheated at the church auction, so." She shrugged with the eloquence of someone whose position had been vindicated. Senator's track record is good. I'll bear that in mind, Claire said. Jake looked at his daughter. He looked at the drawing on the refrigerator. He looked at the light coming through the window, which was no longer gray iron, but something closer to silver, the storm's ceiling thinning to the point where you could imagine just barely the blue that was probably waiting on the other side of it. When they were done eating, he walked Claire to the door. The morning air was cold and sharp, and entirely still, the way air was after a storm had spent itself clarified, emptied of everything extraneous, just the cold and the white and the particular silence of a world that had been through something and come out the other side. Claire's SUV was where he'd left it tilted at its unfortunate angle against the oak, and the fence was still broken, and the tracks from the wheelchair were already half filled with the last of the night's snow. He walked alongside her down the ramp. She stopped at the bottom and turned to face him. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "And I want to be careful not to make that into a transaction. So I'm just going to say it plainly, what you did tonight, not just opening the door, but everything after the door that was not something you owed me. And I know that, and I won't forget it." Jake looked at her in the early morning light. She looked different out here than she had in the kitchen. The same person, but with more dimension. Somehow the cut at her temple a vivid dark line, the silk blouse impossible under the coat she'd gotten back on the wheelchair, leaving clean tracks in the white. She looked like someone in the process of becoming something they couldn't yet fully see, which was, he thought, the most honest and the most human condition available to a person. "Dennis Farrell," he said. "I'll call him this week. Not the week after. This week." She held his gaze. "I promise." He looked at her for a long moment. Not with warmth, not yet, not fully, but with the thing that was the honest precursor to warmth, which was the willingness to believe that a person was capable of becoming more than what they had been. It was not trust. It was not forgiveness. It was something smaller and more durable than either of those things, the seed of something that might or might not grow, depending on what happened in the days and weeks and months that followed, depending on whether the thing said in a kitchen in the middle of a snowstorm survived contact with the ordinary world. "My number is in the phone," he said, "in case you need to reach me." "I'll use it," she said, "not just for the fence." "I know." She looked at him one more moment. Then she turned and began the process of getting herself into the SUV, which was damaged, but it turned out still functional. The driver's side window cracked. One headlight gone, but the engine turned over on the second try, and the hand controls responded, and she backed it carefully off the property and onto Route 12, while he stood on the ramp and watched. She stopped at the edge of the road. He couldn't see her face through the cracked window, but she lifted one hand, not a wave exactly, something quieter than that, an acknowledgement, a receipt, and then she pulled forward, and the SUV moved down Route 12, slow and careful on the packed snow, and he watched it until it went around the bend in the road, and the sound of the engine faded into the white silence of the morning. He stood there for a moment longer. Then he turned and went back inside. Lily was at the table with a piece of paper and her crayons working on something with the focused intensity she brought to anything she considered important. He stood beside her and looked at the drawing taking shape. 2 figures at a table, a wheelchair crayon plates in front of each of them. All 3 figures had enormous smiles. In the corner of the drawing barely fitting a small black dog. "That's us," Lily said without looking up. "This morning." "I can see that. I'm going to give it to her." She said it simply matter-of-factly, the way she said things that were not up for discussion. "When she comes back." Jake looked at the drawing, at the wheelchair, at the 3 enormous smiles, at the dog wedged into the corner like an argument that wasn't finished yet. "Okay," he said. "You think she's coming back?" Lily asked. Still not looking up, still coloring. He thought about the call to Dennis Farrell. He thought about the name on the document. He thought about Roy Okafor, Marcus Webb, Patricia Huang-Jen Calder. He thought about a woman driving herself through a blizzard at midnight because she refused to stop doing things herself. He thought about the green blanket, He thought about, I hope so. I'm going to try. Yeah, he said. I think she's coming back. Lily nodded satisfied and added another crayon stroke to the dog. Jake went to the counter. He picked up the foreclosure notice, the third one, the one that had been sitting there staring at him, and he folded it in half and set it aside. Not because it was solved, not because the morning had fixed anything in the simple, direct way that the night had broken things, but because something had shifted in him in the hours between the crash and the breakfast. Something he could not yet name precisely, but that felt in the way of things that were true, like the first solid ground after a very long time of uncertain footing. He washed the breakfast dishes. He looked out the window at the broken fence. He thought about a 9-year-old girl who was absolutely certain they were going to get the dog, and Jake Calloway, who had learned the hard way that the ground could open without warning, and that rebuilding was slower and more specific and more honest than anyone told you it would be, stood in his kitchen in the early light of a Vermont morning and understood something that he had been working toward for 3 years without knowing it, that what the storm had brought to his door was not a problem to be managed or a wound to be reopened or even a debt to be collected, but simply the next true thing, the kind that arrived without warning at the worst possible moment, and asked you, as all true things eventually did, what kind of man you intended to be. He had answered that question in the dark. Now he had to keep answering it in the light. That he knew was the harder part. That was also the only part that counted.